I'm making this podcast because our world has grown increasingly disconnected. Hate and anger are far too commonplace, and I believe learning about different cultures and religions is the key to closing that divide. Enculturate. Verb. The process by which an individual learns the traditional content of a culture and assimilates its practices and values. All right. Well, welcome to Enculturate. This is the first episode of my new podcast.
Hi.
Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Erika Gold, and I'm a Holocaust survivor from Budapest, Hungary.
All right. So can you just tell me a little bit about your story?
Hungary was the last country that the Germans took over. But by that time, they were very knowledgeable of what they were doing and how fast they can get rid of people. So what they have done in Poland in 5 years, they accomplished in Hungary in less than 2 months.
When did they start that in?
It was March 19th, 1944.
Okay, so that's a lot later.
So the war was almost over, and fortunately. But anyway, they did a thorough job. All the towns outside of Budapest were cleared out of Jews between May and June. Completely, there was no Jew whatsoever in any of those towns. The only people that had a chance to survive was in Budapest. But even there, they started to gather us, and they designated certain buildings that Jews could live, and other buildings was off limits. My mother had an aunt. Our building was off limits, but my mother had an aunt whose building was okay, so we moved in with them. At that point, the Nazis wanted each room to be occupied by a family, not a person. And the way they counted the rooms, if you had one bedroom, a dining room, a kitchen, and a bath, that was considered as 4 rooms. So 4 whole families had to be in that space.
So there were about 16 people in like a one.
So it was very crowded, but we were related, so it was a little easier than if we were total strangers. At that point, we could go out on the street 2 hours a day in the morning, excuse me, just to get the most important food items, which was plentiful fruits and vegetables, because that was the only thing that Jews could have. We were not allowed to buy flour or sugar or meat or even chicken, no dairy products. I received 2 ounces of milk a week because I was under the age of 12. So that was our nourishment. My mother took me every day to the market, and we bought fresh fruits and vegetables, and that's what we lived on. At one point, it was very boring. It was crowded. The children did not know what was going on. Not that the adults were that sure, but the kids for sure, and nobody talked to us because they figured we don't need to know. So at one point, by that time, of course, we had to wear the yellow star that I didn't mention, but I took off my yellow star. I didn't tell anybody, and I knew there was a pastry shop 2 buildings down from where we lived, and I went there. I bought myself an ice cream cone, and as I was eating the ice cream cone, I realized that if somebody recognizes me, they could shoot me on the spot. So it wasn't my brightest idea, but I'm just telling this story because it shows how desperate the situation was that I would take a chance and be that reckless.
So how old are you when that happened?
11.
11.
So then I did not get shot, and I was able to go back home, and I didn't tell anybody I did that, but I promised myself never, ever to be that stupid again. So then things were the same, boring, but I followed the directions. And then in October 15th, a new regime came in. The Arrow Cross took over, and they were going to get rid of the rest of us. By that time, Budapest had no men of working age. There was just old people, women, and children. So the first thing they did, they called up all the women of working age. And so at that point, my mother had to register and go to this big sporting arena. The Nazis had no idea how many people are going to show up. And and they had to register everybody. They were very, very, what's the word? I can't think of it. They had to record everything.
Right, they were very thorough.
Yeah, they were very proud of what they were doing, and everybody. And I have a paper. It happens to be my uncle, and it shows his number, his name, his birth date, where he was from, the camp where he was taken away from, and then the next camp that he was being taken to, the date, and a signature. And so it's very thorough, and it's nice handwritten, neat paper. So at the end of the day, they weren't able to register everybody. So they said anybody who is not registered can go home, and people who are registered, they're okay, they're going to stay there. But my mother, fortunately, wasn't registered. She came home, but right away said she's not going back. She didn't like the situation, she had a feeling, and she's not going back. So she found out that there was a company near Budapest that was making soldier uniforms. And if we could get in there, then they'll save us, because that's important for the war effort. So we were fortunate and got in there and never went outside. We were there, and I have that paper also, and this is where we were, and we got this on the 14th of November of 1944. So we were there. We worked during the day, and at night we slept on the factory floor on the soldier uniforms. So that's how we were there. And while we were there, my dad sent a message that they're going to be taken away from the forced labor camp he was in. And at that point, my mother found out that there were neutral country diplomats in Budapest trying to save the remaining Jews of Europe, because we were it. And they were giving out protective papers, hoping, that will save the remaining Jews. So she got a paper that was sent to my dad, and this is it. This is from the Swiss government. And we knew it was sent to him. We did not know if he received it or if it did any good. But at this point, I have to point out that the two in Budapest weren't the only diplomats that were doing the same thing. They were all over Europe trying to save some Jews, but because they were doing it against their own government, they didn't brag about it. So most people didn't know that even happened until these people got very old and started talking or passed away. and our family found the papers. When Israel built their Holocaust Museum, Yad Vashem, they right away put up a big garden with trees, and each tree had the name of one of these righteous Gentiles who they were diplomats from different countries who were named as righteous among the nations. And fortunately, they ran out of trees. So then they started putting up plaques. The last time I was there, they already had 27,000 plaques, which is a big number, and these people took their life in jeopardy in order to save people who they didn't even know. So it was a big thing, and we have to honor them. In 2005, there was a big exhibit in the Cleveland Public Library called Visas for Life. And by that time, they named more than 100 of these diplomats that were doing the same thing. So anyway, this was sent to my dad. As I mentioned, we had no idea if he got it and if he did any good. So we're working in this factory, and December 1st, which was like 2 weeks after we got the paper, the Nazis came and took us all away. There were 300 women and children in this group. Some of us, they put on trucks. Other people were walking. Of course, we had no idea where we're going to end up. It was a Friday afternoon, and it was getting dusk. I'm so sorry.
Of course.
And so we arrived to this very busy marketplace. People were doing their weekend shopping. It was getting a little darker. It must have been like 5 o'clock, whatever, when we arrived to this marketplace, and the Nazis said, we're going to stop here. Nobody should get out of line or get off the trucks. At that point, the truck that my mother and I were on stopped. She jumped off. She winked at me. I jumped after her, and we walked away. And obviously, nobody saw us or cared. By that time, we knew where our ex-housekeeper lived, and fortunately, we had a very good relationship with her. She lived in an apartment with her daughter, my age. We went there and asked her if we could come in for a couple of days till my mother figures out what else we could do. Unfortunately, there was no place to go or nothing to do. And she was a hero because she let us come in, and knowing that if anybody finds out that we're there, all 4 of us will be shot.
And what's her name?
Ilonka Takács.
Say that again.
Ilonka Takács. And,
Memory be for a blessing.
all right,
You stayed there for about 6 weeks, right?
yeah. And 6 long weeks. But anyway, we never went outside. Her sister used to drop in, and we had to hide because even her sister did not know that we were there because she was afraid she's going to give us away. So it was not easy, but we made it. And January 15th, the Soviet Union Army came and liberated us.
So what was that moment like for you, knowing that you were finally out of that?
I mean, it was great. I mean, we were very happy, but we didn't go anywhere because they were shooting outside, and we didn't know what was happening, so we stayed put. And 3 days later, a miracle happened. My dad found us. And there were very few families that stayed intact like that. We were very lucky because I'm an only child, so there was 3 of us to start out with, and 3 of us survived, which was an absolute miracle. So that was on the 18th of January when he came. And then we found out that this paper, the so-called Schutzpass from the Swiss government, came, the paper came to him, and the Nazi actually called him out of the cattle car and let him go. By that time, there was a ghetto in Budapest, and that's where my dad spent the remaining days. Now, the ghetto was not that far from where we lived. Not now, but 10 years ago, I could have walked it very easily. But it took the Russian army 3 whole days to liberate the ghetto, and with that, they liberated the whole Pest side of the city. Budapest is made out of two cities, Buda and Pest. The Danube is in the middle. The Germans blew up all the bridges on the Danube after Pest was liberated, so it took the army another 30 days before they were able to get on the other side. And then they kept on going, and the Soviet Union was going west, the Allies were going east, liberating the different towns and countries, including the concentration camps. And when the people came back from the concentration camps is when we found out all the horrible, horrible things that happened there, and that all the people that we can't expect to come back.
So before then, you guys didn't know that all that was going on?
No. We just knew people disappeared, but we were always hoping that they'll come back after the war is over. But we had no idea of the final solution that was actually arranged in 1942 at the Wannsee conference, and that started the gas chambers and the crematorium.
So just going back to morbid childhood.
Okay, so
what were adults' reactions and stuff after the night of broken glass and things started?
See, that I did not know that. I don't know if my parents knew, but I did not know. I haven't heard about that until afterwards. But I know some people who were there, like one of my cousins were in Vienna, and it was interesting, her father was a physician. And they knew that the Nazis are picking up men, so he kind of disappeared, and they couldn't find him. But the mother was there, and she had to go down to the street to scrub the sidewalk with toothbrushes on her hands and knees. And one of the Nazis recognized her, who happened to be the patient of her husband, and said, no, not her, let her go. So it just depended if they knew one Jewish person that they liked, that was okay. But all the others, one could be shot. But so that's what's going on with Kristallnacht that I know of personally. Yeah, go ahead.
Were they, how aware was the community of the increasing anti-Semitism, as you were growing up? Because Hitler took power a couple months after the war.
See, when I was growing up in Hungary, there was definite anti-Semitism. The schools only let 2% the student body could be 2% Jews, which is a very tiny number. So my parents put me in a Jewish day school. So I didn't have that problem. But otherwise, I was able to do at that point whatever I wanted to do. It was just with the schools and the education, the universities, they wouldn't let Jews in medical school, law school, or engineering. And I knew that as a little kid, but it didn't affect me.
Yeah.
My parents were listening to Radio Free Europe, and that was because all the other news outlets were propaganda. Only what Hitler wanted people to know. and that's one of the reasons we talk about the Holocaust now, to have people realize what is true and what is not. It's very important. Right now, it's very important that you know that what is not the truth. Anyway, so that's how I grew up. My parents listening to the Radio Free Europe, and I had to be very quiet, and I couldn't tell anybody. So I knew something was wrong. I didn't understand. And I heard Hitler screaming on the radio, and you didn't have to understand German in order to realize that it was not good. Whatever he said, it was not good. So that's how I grew up. And just to get back to liberation, at that point when my dad came, then we could walk around the city. It was completely free of Nazis and Germans. And so we tried to go back to our old apartment, and we went back hoping that nobody occupied it, because that's the reason they kicked the Jews out, to have other people take over. But because it was the top floor of a big apartment building, nobody wanted to live there, because there were a lot of bombings and air raids, and so nobody wanted to live on the top floor of any building. So it was exactly how we left it. We were very lucky in that. The only problem was all the windows were broken because of the bombings, but we forgot to close one window. It happened to be in the bathroom. My parents pulled in one of these pull-out couches. They slept in that, and I slept in the bathtub. We had no food, no running water, no gas, no electricity, but we were free. And then when you're free, things get better, except in this case, we found out all the horrible things that we didn't know before. But, and then it was, we never wanted to stay in Europe after that. And even before, my parents asked for a visa to the United States in 1936. That was way before the Holocaust. And even after, 10 years later, our number wasn't even close. So in 1948, my dad found out that the Cuban government is selling visas. So he bought us visas, and we went to Cuba. We were out of Europe and closer to the United States. And then we had to wait there 2 more years before we finally got the visa to come to the States. So in 1950, we came here, and in order to immigrate, you had to have a sponsor. And my mother had a sister and a brother here in town, and they sponsored us. So that's why we came to Cleveland. And by that time, I had a lot of holes in my education. So that was the most important thing for me, to get back to school, of course, learn English, and get done with my education. So I was lucky. I was young enough to be admitted in Heights High, Cleveland Heights High. And so I started in September 1950. I graduated in June 1952. Then I went to Reserve. At that time it wasn't together with Case. It was Western Reserve University. In 1956, I graduated as a medical technologist. And I got married the same year. And we have 2 kids, 4 grandchildren, and I have 2 great-grands, and I can't put them on the picture. We'll have to do something, rearrange the pictures to get them onto.
So growing up, when the Nuremberg laws were happening in Germany, eventually they kind of found their way over all the other countries.
Actually, Hungary was started before that.
Really?
Yeah, before Germany, they were already
When did you
anti-Semitic.
already have to start wearing the...
Oh, that we didn't have to wear until the Germans occupied Hungary, and it was April 1st, 1944. So in 44 is when the Germans occupied Hungary,
Oh.
March 19th.
Okay.
And by April 1st, we had to wear the yellow star.
Okay. All right. Yeah. It's interesting. So, did other, was there like a visible like reaction from the community when that was starting to happen?
Just scared. Everybody was scared because we didn't know what was happening. See, first when we wore the yellow star, we had to wear the yellow star. Some people were saying it's no big deal, so we wear a yellow star. But it was a big deal because then all the laws came out for people with the yellow star and had to do this or couldn't do that. And so that's how it started, and it always got worse and worse. And in the small town, my grandfather's parents' home is here. This is the front and the back of the house. They lived in a small town, Galanta. It was at the Slovak border. And my grandfather had to move out of their house right away, like the beginning of April, because a German officer needed his house. They moved in with another family member, and he said that as long as they leave a roof over our heads, we'll be okay. So everybody was always very optimistic. And unfortunately, then we didn't hear from him till the time in June, when they were taken away. And that's when they went to Auschwitz. And unfortunately, we know that they put 80 to 120 people into cattle cars with no food and hardly any air because those things had a little window.
Yeah.
And then when they got to Auschwitz, there was Dr. Mengele, who was separating the people. And anybody he felt could work went on one side. Anybody who he felt was too old, too young, or a woman with a child went on the other side, and that was the gas chamber at the crematorium. And they say it took about 2 hours from the time the train stopped to have these people completely disappear. And that we had no idea that this was going on, although there were 2 guys that escaped from Auschwitz and was telling governments and individuals what was going on there, and nobody believed them. They thought they